Good afternoon and good morning to those joining us out west. I'm Karen Langdon with the National Emergency Management Association, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Virtual Exercises and Beyond. Thank you again for being with us today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Bogan, Analysis and Narrative Management Section Chief at FEMA. Kate, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. I want to thank you all for joining us today on this webinar titled Virtual Exercises and Beyond. As Karen mentioned, my name is Kate Bogan, and I am the Analysis and Narrative Management Section Chief at FEMA's National Exercise Division. And I'm joined by my colleague, Matt O'Shea, who is also a member of our National Exercise Division. So today we're going to provide a quick overview of the National Exercise Program and kind of put in context the types of exercise we work on and how we help jurisdictions to implement their exercise programs as part of the national preparedness system. And then how we've adapted all of that into the virtual environment due to COVID. So Matt's going to provide an overview of our virtual exercise capabilities, summarize some of our experiences and lessons learned, and discuss opportunities in the future for doing exercises virtually through the National Exercise Program. The National Exercise Program is a 2-year cycle of exercises that is run through the National Exercise Division at FEMA, and is that national level mechanism to validate core capabilities across all of our mission areas as part of the national preparedness system. We look at a lot of data from across the national preparedness system, including state and local preparedness reviews, as well as capability assessments and risk assessments from all levels of government and the National Preparedness Report to come up with our principal strategic priorities that guide that 2-year cycle of exercises. So as part of the National Exercise Program, we offer technical assistance and support to any jurisdiction that is asking for assistance in designing, developing, and delivering and evaluating exercises. We also have a number of tools, templates, and other resources that can help you to run your own exercises in a much more streamlined way. By participating in the National Exercise Program, you have the opportunity to broaden the impact of your exercise by gaining access to a broader stakeholder group. We do exercises at all levels of government, so and across the private sector and with non-governmental organizations as well. So participating in the National Exercise Program, we can connect you to new partners that you want to work with and that you would need to work with in the event of a real-world incident. And we all know that exercising and kind of getting to meet everyone before something bad happens is always better. And then lastly, we take all of the results from our exercises that are conducted as part of the National Exercise Program and analyze that information to inform national preparedness policy, program resource allocation, and decisions, again, at all levels related to exercise design and development in the future. So just like many of you, we've all had to adapt to the COVID-19 environment, which means taking a lot of the exercises that we would be doing in person, especially our discussion-based exercises, and moving them to virtual platforms. We've learned a lot through this process and how we adapt our normal processes for the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program methodology, and make it reasonable and realistic in this COVID environment, as well as safe in the COVID environment. We continue to scope our operations-based capability and really look at how we can continue to amplify and use the resources that we have available as part of Prep Toolkit and combine those with other operating picture capabilities at the jurisdiction level to really deliver those operations-based exercises virtually. But the best practices that Matt is going to talk through today are primarily what we've learned from our discussion-based exercises so far. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
All right, thanks, Kate. Hey, everyone, this is Matt O'Shea. I'm an exercise program manager, official title, emergency management specialist, underneath the Homeland Security section within the National Exercise Division over at FEMA headquarters. So here's our rough agenda for the remaining portion of our webinar that will carry us to the question and answer period. And I understand, while not everyone on this audience is an exercise practitioner, all of us are involved in exercises, certainly in some fashion, and I appreciate your interest in this topic today. I hope that you can take away a few useful ideas to improve your own virtual events, exercises, and accomplish your objectives, keep your stakeholders and your staff safe during this pandemic. There is a lot of content in these slides, and I struggled on the decision to cut some of it, but I now know that you have all received it via handouts, so please keep that in mind. I may hurry through some slides, but you have the slides as a reference for after this webinar. First, I'm going to provide some perspective and real-world examples of what NED has accomplished from the federal down to the state and local level in virtual exercises. I'll then talk about some specific programs that are in use at our level and what you should or may consider when choosing one for your own exercises. Following that, I will discuss the various stages of exercise planning and conduct and work through some of the challenges we have encountered since the pandemic started, and of course, the best practices that we have compiled. And at the end, we'll discuss the NEP nomination timeline, some reference material that is upcoming through FEMA headquarters, and we'll have approximately 20 minutes left for a Q&A. And if all else fails, the NEP inbox, which you will see later in the presentation, is always open for questions. So, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk about perspective. These slides were developed through the lens of an exercise program manager, which is what I am. Within the National Exercise Program, if a nominated exercise is approved, an EPM is assigned to then partner with that nominating sponsor to then develop the exercise. You will hear the terms exercise program manager or EPM, sponsor, stakeholder, and participant throughout the rest of my slides here. As it says in my bio, I'm largely focused on exercises within the Department of Homeland Security, so I did spend some time with our state and local team to ensure their equities were also represented, as I'm understanding most of the audience today is from that realm. This slide and the next one provide examples on what NED has delivered during COVID-19 pandemic for both federal and SLTT partners. It's just a small slice. I wanted to highlight some useful examples to help give context. So today's example should help provide an idea of what is possible with a virtual exercise. We understand comfort levels vary with the virtual events. Obviously, there's virtual fatigue out there now that we're in month, 10, 11, 12 of the pandemic. But with enough planning and effort on everyone's part, you can still tackle fairly complex issues and move this to be more than simply just another meeting. The first two examples on this slide are from the federal side and from my own portfolio. You can have a read through the two columns as I provide some more context. The first exercise on the left was from the DHS Privacy Office and had to meet a regulatory requirement to review current regulations and exercise the DHS Privacy Breach Response Plan. Some examples of where this applies is employee misconduct or mishandling of, say, disaster survivor information through a FEMA program, or potentially a bad external actor getting a hold of sensitive employee personal identifiable information. This event brought together privacy and IT staff from across DHS to receive briefs from subject matter experts, updates on relevant policy and regulations, and provided an opportunity to work through a few complex scenarios to extract best practices and identify gaps in the current plan between all the unique components of DHS. DHS is a very interesting animal, so it was nice to get all of them on the line because everyone has their own mission. I highlighted this exercise because it served two purposes: professional development and the exercising of an existing plan. This is also a great example because this event had been an annual in-person tabletop exercise that is scheduled to occur every summer. Due to the COVID-19 and workforce protection requirements, FEMA NED had to convince the sponsor to convert this event to virtual instead of seeking delays in the hope COVID-19 blew over. We had to undertake a bit of an influence campaign to sell the virtual option by clearly explaining every step of the planning process and detailing the run of show for their benefit, and also to build trust. Getting their buy-in early and often was critical, and it turned out to be a great event and allowed expanded participation well beyond those in the headquarters elements in the national capital region. The second example is a compilation of 3 virtual TTXs from both the Republican and Democrat national conventions and the recent presidential inauguration. FEMA NED works with the Secret Service to develop and deliver a series of exercises to help the whole community prepare for designated national special security events. One of those exercises is a consequence management tabletop exercise that's built in coordination with the applicable FEMA region and local partners. This exercise brought together first responders, emergency managers, and others to discuss response actions and resource coordination following a catastrophic event during an NSSE. Such a catastrophic event has thankfully never happened before in NSSE history, so it was a challenge to develop a realistic and plausible scenario that would stress the plan and its assigned resources. Those emergency managers very early on understood the risk of COVID-19 and workforce protection measures and quickly chose to convert this from an in-person to a fully virtual event. These exercises were also successful and allowed the emergency managers time to work together outside of other law enforcement-centric exercises where their equities were often skipped over. So these last 2 examples are from the state, local, tribal, territorial section of FEMA NED. The first on the left was an excellent exercise that focused on Texas's statewide hurricane response plan while viewed through the lens of COVID-19. Take a look at that participation count in the bottom left. 900 is a pretty remarkable number. They had people online from all over Texas at every level of state and local government, plus non-government organizations. One major element of this event was reviewing how state-level plans affects local jurisdictions. One example is shown on the slide, a discussion on congregate and non-congregate sheltering while in a pandemic, which is a complex topic to tackle at the best of times, let alone during a pandemic, let alone through a virtual exercise. But it was successful. The second exercise on the right was another great event, but far more targeted in scope and scale. This exercise focused on reviewing a specific plan for a specific high-capacity structure during a live event. I included this because of its targeted scope, tactical review of a plan, and the fact that this virtual exercise was meant to be a precursor to a full-scale in-person exercise, which was sadly later canceled. Regardless, this shows one use of virtual exercises, providing a low-threat environment to discuss plans, resources, and coordination measures at different echelons prior to a larger live event. Exercises like this can be educational, help turn assumptions into facts, and identify gaps in your applicable plans. So with those examples in mind, we developed this simple slide to help bucket the different ways virtual exercises can be planned and executed. Keep in mind that the majority of this presentation is focused on discussion-based exercises like Kate mentioned earlier, as compared to operational exercises. So in HSEEP, Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program language, that means workshops, seminars, tabletop exercises, and games. Discussion-based exercises are obviously the easiest to adapt to a fully virtual environment. That first bullet, the first bucket, I call it, is the most common, the most user-friendly from a participant point of view. It lets users connect from wherever they may be it at the office or from home. It allows maximum participation, but does present unique exercise control and technology challenges when you have that many people that many unique connections coming into your exercise. It must be noted that making access to these exercises too easy can make your event cumbersome. This method maximizes participant safety concerning COVID-19 because everyone's connecting from their disparate locations. But planners should consider the impacts on critical participants, especially when it comes to senior leaders. Is their participation effectiveness suffering by being divorced from their support staff or subject matter experts? To put that in other words, think about your own boss 2 or 3 levels up. If they're expected to show up to a tabletop exercise, are they prepared to participate in a meaningful way by themselves? So that question is where the second bucket comes into play. This method mimics everything about bucket 1, but allows participants to co-locate as requested or needed and connect to the exercise as a unit while managing their own social distancing. This lowers the number of unique connections to the exercise and allows senior participants to have their support staff nearby. A good example of this is from my consequence management exercise mentioned earlier, supporting the inauguration. That exercise occurred at the senior leader level, think police and fire chief type crowd. The police and fire folks are working every day, all day, executing their mission while dealing with COVID-19, and they accept certain risks. They also have real-world operations occurring during our exercises. Those chiefs are busy people and have dedicated deputy chiefs who can help the primary chief provide correct and thorough input to the exercise and also stand in for them as needed if they are called away. Allowing organizations to huddle up before responding to a complex issue or question during the exercise is invaluable and helps reduce negative learning and may even prevent some professional embarrassment. The third and most complex bucket relates to operations-based exercises and is what I call a hybrid, where you convert certain elements of in-person exercise play, control, or evaluation to virtual while keeping other parts in person. This could also encompass the virtual connection of numerous distributed in-person playing locations via a virtual program. This mostly applies to operations-based exercises, as I said, where some player action must occur in person with or without live evaluation. This method requires a lot of coordination, wargaming, and rehearsal to execute effectively, but it does allow exercise planners some ways to use virtual techniques to protect players and exercise staff. One example is to look at your exercise conduct, control, and evaluation structure and determine what elements can be divorced from each other by space or done completely virtually. This can help limit the amount of exercise staff deployed to the exercise and allow more room for social distancing at your physical play locations. Tying this back to the National Exercise Program and Kate's brief earlier, NED is highly encouraging exercise sponsors and the NEP to consider the first 2 buckets, as these provide the maximum workforce protection and also allow us to stay in line with current travel restrictions within FEMA. This, as with everything, may evolve as COVID-19 situation improves and NED looks to increase the scope of our capabilities concerning operations-based exercises. So virtual exercises have allowed NED to adapt to the COVID-19 challenges and still deliver successful events for our exercise sponsors across the country in support of their missions. But here are some items that should be on your mind when considering a virtual exercise. Virtual exercises work especially well for discussion exercises, as we keep harping on that, such as tabletops and seminars. And the increased familiarity of all these virtual collaboration tools makes it just a little less painful to adapt to now that we have been well versed in their use. Some of the points we discussed with our exercise sponsor are on the slide, and I'll highlight a few. From the benefits, cost is the most obvious, as it can become a very sticky issue when it comes to money. But consider the cost savings now that travel is either completely eliminated or severely reduced if you go this route, depending on your organization's unique situation. Participation can certainly be expanded within reason, well beyond the physical limitations of any room or conference space that you were looking at. More stakeholders can listen in and even contribute. COVID-19 safety benefits are also obvious, but it's important to note certain organizations accept more risk than others. Going virtual does make use of these tools that are already in use, so the chance of you having to go get an off-the-shelf product for a virtual exercise is fairly low. For challenges regarding participant engagement, think back to those examples I provided. One had a very high amount of participation in terms of raw numbers, but you must know that not everyone was able to actively speak in such a large meeting. Planners have to manage expectations and leverage other methods such as chat or question and answer to gain input and collaboration from those partners to ensure all users have a chance to contribute if desired. It's important to identify critical participants versus everyone else. That third bullet on the right is my main focus when starting planning. My goal is to make this virtual event more than just a meeting and also to combat meeting fatigue. That requires building trust with the sponsor and an increased amount of planning and coordination and effective tactical use of program features to make it an interactive and worthwhile event. We are all in enough meetings as it is. This event should stand apart from everything else in their day. Even 9+ months into this pandemic, we're still finding users who are unfamiliar with certain programs, and they just require a little bit of special care to get them on board. It's important to budget time and staff effort to this issue. Obviously, you will know your stakeholders well, and you will have an idea of who needs some special care compared to others. And that last bullet, it's a tough one to overcome, but you can mitigate user-level technical issues or lack of technical knowledge on headsets and audio connections through effective messaging, read-aheads, and of course, testing. So here are some considerations for choosing a program. We have found that there is no single program that is universally authorized for use across the federal interagency or our state, local, tribal, territorial partners. Each organization has unique restrictions, limitations, and versions of commonly used programs. Planners must research and test to find the most effective and wide-reaching program that meets their needs. Platforms have many interactive features that can enhance the exercise, such as use of chat, polls, raising the hand, reactions, sharing of screens or products, and even breakout group functionality. Determine what you need early and go from there when you're doing your research. Determine how strictly participation can and will be managed, and if you're going to consider operational security, especially if your exercise touches on for official use only or law enforcement sensitive topics. Using access control measures and other exercise participation control measures, such as requiring registration and a tight control over the connection details, helps keep things organized, but again, requires extra staff time, coordination, and effort. Also must consider how to engage individuals with access and functional needs. Again, you have to think of your audience, who is the benefactor of your exercise. For example, the making use of closed captioning or American Sign Language interpreters as needed. The last bullet there is really focusing in on conducting tests and rehearsals as needed to validate any and all assumptions, and also to view the program from both the moderator's point of view, so your general admin user, versus a general user's perspective. It's important to see both because that can lead to some incorrect assumptions on behalf of the exercise staff. Always consider what your user sees compared to what you see. All right, so this eye chart here is likely to evoke some emotion and a plethora of opinions. And I debated whether I should delete it or not, but I chose to keep it simply as a reference. And I know we all have our favorite programs, so please be mindful of this disclaimer. The chart is provided for information and reference purposes only, based on our organization's experience, and is certainly subject to change. Your experience may vary. As I said before, just because I or you have version X of a program, that they are not the same often enough in our experience. Permissions and restrictions vary wildly, even within the federal government, and let alone DHS. Department of Homeland Security and FEMA do not officially endorse any of these listed products or services. So with that said, I provided this slide as a reference, but your mileage will vary. I won't debate the merits of a specific program. This is only a list of the 3 most commonly used programs for us at NED, plus an outlier, Zoom, which is often requested, but not in widespread use due to some security concerns, specifically when it comes to for official use only, FOUO, or law enforcement sensitive subject matter. Just tread carefully. I implore you to do your own research and testing, because FEMA is under some unique restrictions that impact program availability and functionality. It all comes down to research. What is authorized in your organization? What about your stakeholders, your expected participants? Does the program have the features you and your exercise planners require to accomplish your objectives? Validate all of these assumptions through research and deliberate testing. All right, so let's move on to development. Something we have encountered is listed in that first bullet, a lack of trust in virtual events. This may be less applicable now, but it was certainly a hot topic early on when we had to pull sponsors over the hill to agree to some virtual exercises as COVID became such a tremendous threat. You may remember my first real-world example a few slides ago, where we had to clearly and deliberately explain the planning process, run of show, and exactly how participants will be able to interact in a virtual environment. We had to explain and convince to the sponsor what a virtual exercise looked like. Building the plane in flight, for us, it was a learning experience, but it was successful. It all came down to convincing the sponsor that with enough effort, we can move past this being just another meeting. I spent some one-on-one time with my sponsors before and after every major planning meeting, just to ensure that they were in agreement and singing the same song I was. Getting them motivated, getting their buy-in, and having the message of stakeholders led to a greater level and quality of participation. That third bullet, at framing the exercise, like anything else, you do need to establish some boundaries, both on the discussion and the physical boundaries in terms of the duration of the exercise. You must consider the intended complexity of the discussion and ensure that it is married to your objectives and the time available. Consider how you are formatting your exercise as well. Is everyone connecting as an individual from home, or are groups allowed to co-locate? That may change how you facilitate the exercise. These considerations should influence your participation requirements and messaging. The fourth bullet is a particular pain point for me. Virtual events do allow for greater outreach to stakeholders, greater participation. However, some folks assume that once an event goes virtual, it's a free-for-all. I would caution you to consider some control measures on participation and limiting non-critical participants like observers. Having too many people can stress the exercise control staff, stress the program potentially, and raise the risk of someone lacking mute discipline and disrupting the event. Coordinating participation levels with your exercise format, be it mass plenary or a plenary plus breakout groups, is important. And you must consider, can your participating organizations accommodate your format? How do you handle the organization that can only have one person online if you wish to have numerous breakout groups? Just something to consider. That last bullet is also a common occurrence. As an exercise program manager, I'm always focused on meeting the objectives and the desired outcomes of my exercise sponsor. Scenario development brings in a lot of non-exercise subject matter experts, rightfully so, to make sure it's plausible and realistic. However, the scenario often becomes the shiny object in the room and draws a lot of interest and attention, potentially to the detriment of other parts of the exercise. I advise you to marry the complexity of the scenario to the desired complexity of the discussion and your objectives. Don't spin your wheels making the perfect scenario for a discussion-based exercise that appeases everyone unless you have the time to both develop and discuss it during the exercise. That's always a difficult balance. All right, so best practices for development. You never want to start from scratch or ignore the past, right? So as mentioned in the webinar's advertisement, part of NED's process is to review recent exercise and real-world after-action reports prior to exercise development and potentially throughout to make sure we're on target. This allows us to get informed, as we often come as a third party into your jurisdiction, and it also ensures that the exercise advances the mission and is a good use of time. It also serves as an opportunity to remind your audience to read those AARs again, as they are often developed and potentially put in a shared drive and never seen again. Exercises are a great opportunity to look to the past, the now, and of course, the future. That third bullet on the left hits at participation again. This is one item that elevates a meeting into an exercise, as it ties back to the objectives and the facilitator's engagement plan. It's critical to understand the organizations present, the individuals representing them as much as possible, their ranks, their titles, and of course, their relationships between the organizations and the interdependencies that come into play. Know your audience. This makes facilitation more personal and insightful. On the top right, we do offer one way to help control participation and get a better handle on who's actually connecting. This is important for FOUO and law enforcement sensitive exercises. Simply use of a registration process. This means that you are protecting the connection info to the exercise via things like limiting forwarding or only sharing the connection details right before the exercise. There's numerous ways you can do it. This also relates to your access control measures on the day of the exercise. Do you have someone at the door making sure only the right people get in? Do you need to? You just have to determine that early on and make sure you have a plan and a staffing member for it. That last bullet on the bottom right touches on the program of choice again. Once a program is chosen, it will pay dividends to offer numerous and open testing sessions for expected participants to connect to test things out, to build trust and confidence in the system. We often offer 2 to 4 open testing sessions before our virtual exercises, depending on the number and the seniority of the participants, and run them up all the way to the day before the exercise. I'll show an example on the next slide, but I want to highlight, especially when you get to the senior level, these folks are very busy. They may or not be technically sound, require a lot of hands-on attention. Offering that one-on-one assistance as needed for a critical participant cannot be ignored outside of these testing sessions. All right, so I'm going to breeze through this one, but I offer it as an example of a slide we use for a testing session. The purpose of testing is to ensure users can connect correctly and also primarily to condition their behavior. Think ground rules. You want people to understand and participate within the ground rules. We use a variation of this slide during our pre-exercise open testing sessions that I just mentioned. And again, in the hour before StartX, the day of the exercise, as people join so they could get accustomed to the room again. I'm going to move on due to time, but again, you have this reference in the slides in the handout. All right, so let's talk staffing briefly. So it's a common misconception that staffing virtual exercises is a simple task. I will tell you that staffing is one of the things that staffing and preparation of that staff is what separates a meeting from a discussion-based exercise. Exercise staffing should always scale with the scope and complexity of the exercise. That's fairly obvious. So I'm just going to hit on some of the unique virtual roles that NED has worked through in the recent past. That facilitator, obviously extremely important, is the make or break person for an effective exercise to get after your objectives. The hosts and co-hosts, those are your folks who have full admin privileges within your meeting space. They need to be well versed in all elements of that program, contingencies, backups, technical support, and just understand the script, so to say, from meeting open to meeting close. The technical support people are also well versed in the program, and they have we'll call it a skill for helping individuals with technical issues. So those folks are on standby. They're monitoring chat, they're monitoring emails, they're monitoring their phone for people, users, participants who are having issues. My audio won't work, my webcam won't work, the link isn't working. Usually it's a very low level problem. It's best handled outside of the exercise, and these people do one-on-one engagement as needed to fix that user's issue. The interactive feature monitors, that relates back to the facilitator. Some facilitators are so skilled and competent enough that they can do their job, keep an eye on the notes, keep an eye on the slides, run the discussion, and keep an eye on the chat and the raise hands and all the other features you choose to use. We have found that to take some of that burden away, have a staff member simply monitor the chat, monitor those features, and they have a back channel, private chat, private communications line to the facilitator and the rest of the staff to notify him or her when a question comes across chat or an issue comes across chat or someone raised their hand, and then the facilitator can very easily rack and stack those individuals and call them out by name and continue to engage. Keeps it looking very professional. It shows that you care about a participant's input and that you have done all the due diligence in the back end to make sure this exercise looks professional. The last two I'll hit is evaluator versus note taker. They are very separate. I understand some organizations may dual hat due to staffing concerns. However, we separate them. Note takers, verbatim notes, evaluators are doing targeted notes and critical thought on certain objectives. All right, I'm going to pick up speed here. So challenges with exercise conduct, real world disruptions outside of your control, but have a way to understand when someone quits, leaves the room, or has to sign off for whatever reason. How do you get that information back to your facilitator? You always want your facilitator to know who's in the room, especially if they're a critical participant. You want to avoid any awkward moments or embarrassment. You want to maintain professionalism. Technical issues for users and hosts. You want to make sure you have backups. You have a plan on how to assist your host or any other user who has an issue with their connection. Contingency plans. You may encounter an insurmountable barrier. You have to have a contingency plan, whether it's just going simple teleconference, a 15-minute break. You also have to consider how are you messaging that contingency plan to your partners. They have to know. You can't do it in a vacuum. Breakout groups are something that should always be considered for a virtual exercise. They serve some great purposes, such as allowing the group to collaborate and return to plenary with a back brief. You could also must keep in mind that breakout rooms, although great, do require both the technical know-how in the program and extra staffing and should be fully rehearsed before exercise conduct. So some best practices, again, related to conduct. We open the room early, we conduct testing, and we clearly lay out the ground rules numerous times to keep people's behavior in line with what we desire. We're always monitoring participation and keeping the facilitator in the know. We have a standard for screen name format that allows the facilitator to fully understand who's speaking and also helps our note takers. Technical assistance, like I said, best applied outside of the exercise via phone call direct. As much as you can handle individuals personally, again, will pay dividends to you in the exercise. And then having that private chat for exercise staff to reach out and touch the facilitator is a major best practices from this summer we learned. So facilitator preparation, self-explanatory, know your audience, know the subject matter, and of course, know the program. Rehearsals, also self-explanatory. War game your plan and the facilitator's guide to help you find some gaps and then validate your staff understands all of their roles and that they have the appropriate level of access. You want to make sure you understand all the features you're going to use in your program. You understand how to monitor them, how to act on them, how to terminate them. You don't want to learn that during exercise conduct. I provide this as a quick reference from one of our NSSE exercises. It's a snapshot of our scenario slide. And a good scenario slide lists the facts, the applicable doctrine and plans, and is backed up by an engaging facilitator with targeted questions, and that will result in a great discussion. Can't harp on that enough. A simple, well-made slide that references the specific plans in question, combined with the facilitator, will take you places. And do not let people fight your scenario. So evaluation. So as you read it later today or now, you will see that some of these items are listed in both best practices and challenges. I hope you'll see the distinction between them. We found that we found that asking for evaluators from organizations who are subject matter experts in that field is a best practice. NED, we have some all-round general use, great people, but we are not subject matters in some of these exercise areas. So we always ask for those people to help out with staffing. But it's a challenge because that means that person has to be willing and able to support. We don't want to rely specifically on note takers just for evaluation. We want them to focus on their efforts, but we understand dual hatting them is often a staffing restriction. And then it's inevitable that issues and discussions come up that are either not in line with the objectives or you simply don't have the time. You want to create that parking lot, advertise that parking lot, show the participants that parking lot to show that you are taking ownership of the information that they are providing you. You do not want to let it go into the black hole. If you can show ownership, that you care, that will likely bring out a higher level of participation from your participants. So this is a quick snapshot of a recent innovation from our various teams here at NED regarding participant feedback. They developed this online form through Microsoft Office and deployed it using the QR code. You can try it now or later with an internet-connected smartphone or tablet. iPhones should be automatic. Android users need a specific app. And then typically, we also provide the link in the chat in exercises for those who do not want to or cannot use this feature, so we can cover everybody. Alternatively, you can deploy fillable PDF questionnaires to be emailed back or some other website-based survey, though tread carefully with operational security and access issues when using third-party websites. Just disclaimer there. The most important thing is to get this done as soon as possible, either during your exercise, at the tail end, or right after, because every day you let it linger, you're going to get less and less. This is a shameless plug slide. We extracted some comments from exercise feedback forms and general feedback from our exercise partners. So consider this a plug for FEMA NED. So I mentioned reference material. So FEMA NED is in the process of compiling lessons learned from all of our federal and SLTT partners into a single unified product, and it will be advertised and discussed through a series of webinars that are to be scheduled, just like this one, in the near future. So please keep an eye out. They'll also be posted to FEMA.gov, and we're working on a messaging strategy to make sure it reaches as far and wide as possible. With that, I pass to Kate. She's going to cover the NEP nomination, and then we'll do question and answer.
Thank you so much, Matt. So now that you know that we can still provide support in a virtual environment, I wanted to let you all know about our upcoming nomination round, which is how jurisdictions can request support through the National Exercise Program in the spring and in the fall. So we are currently accepting nominations for the spring round. If you want your nominations to be reviewed during this round, we will need you to submit your requests, also known as nominations, by the deadline of April 1st. Nominations are going to be reviewed by a panel of stakeholders from the National Exercise Division, representatives from FEMA's National Preparedness Directorate, and other federal stakeholders in the exercise community to develop a recommendation of the kinds of support that the NEP can provide. Sponsors will be notified with a decision by May 3rd, 2021. And once the April 1st deadline passes, we're not going to be able to consider any additional nominations until the fall round that will open up in November. A couple of things to think about when requesting support through the NEP. One is definitely the timing. It's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but it takes some time to actually, plan an exercise, as you all know. And so think about having at least a 4-month lead time for any sort of discussion-based exercise, and longer for an operations-based exercise. So if you have exercises that you're planning for this summer or even in the early fall, we highly recommend that you put together those nominations here for the spring round. Also think about what kind of support you want and what things you want to focus on. We're always available to talk you through the nomination process and the nomination form, and what makes a really strong request and helps us in deciding how we can best support you. So please feel free to reach out. I believe our contact information is going to be on the next, on the last slide of the deck. So you can always reach out to nep@fema.dhs.gov. I do want to give some time for questions. So Matt, if you're ready, I'll jump in and ask you some of the questions that we've received in the box throughout your presentation. So I'm sure you've had some experience in dealing with disruptive participants. Do you have any recommendations for how to kind of handle that in the moment or how to prevent that ahead of time?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it comes down to that facilitator's interpersonal skills, right? But in terms of program functionality, obviously you have the ultimate sanction of removing them from the room if it's that bad. You have the mandated mute function, but it's often just up to that facilitator, especially if they're a critical participant whose opinion really does matter to the exercise sponsor and meeting the objectives, is navigating them back to where you want them to be. Potentially a little pandering, but it's really the facilitator working them back to get on target, on scenario, on objective, by acknowledging their comment, acknowledging their input, and then potentially asking a leading question to reel them back in to where they need to be.
Great, thanks, Matt. The next question is, what impact have virtual exercises had on the AAR process? Is it easier, harder, about the same? What are some of the unique challenges that you've experienced?
Yep, so I'll answer this through my federal hat for the National Special Security events. So the first 2 exercises in that series are discussion-based exercises where the plans are not signed, they're not final. In fact, they're very early in the planning process. So what are we really evaluating against? So we noticed that it's tough to build exercise evaluation guides. It's tough to really do a thorough evaluation. So what we decided on is, instead of a full evaluation effort, we take verbatim, copious notes. We conduct post-exercise interviews to make sure those notes were captured correctly. And we develop what we eventually called a summary of observations or a summary of conclusions, and provide that back to the sponsor, and they can take that and run with it, where we identify some potential gaps from some friction points or issues that we have noticed during the exercise, and again through the reading of our notes. And that has kind of been where we have been for virtual evaluation. It has been a challenge. You hate to dial back support, but especially because most of my exercises, the plans were not fully matured yet. That was a distinct challenge to evaluate against the immature plan.
Great, thank you. The next question is, will the AAR info also be available through the prep toolkit?
Wish I was more of a prep toolkit expert. I believe the answer is yes. Let me, I'm going to flag that in my notes, and I will flesh that out in our post-webinar readout from NEMA if we can flag that, Kate. I don't want to give an incorrect answer unless you're aware.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we generally post a lot of our materials, including our templates, tools, exercise starter kits, all of those types of resources we like to make available through our prep toolkit system. We also post some of them on the FEMA.gov website, but the majority of them will be available through prep toolkit. But we have the question from Stephen Williams, so we'll be sure to get a more detailed response back to you. The next question is, how would you handle breakout sessions during a virtual tabletop exercise? How do you monitor them on potentially, separate virtual calls, etc.?
Yep. So this was a lesson learned as well for us from the Democrat National Convention exercise we did. So what we noticed, let's just make this program agnostic. The key is to maintain an exercise control person, a staff member, with every breakout, whether that breakout is done through teleconference or your program has the capability of creating a breakout room with its own unique, unified audio channel. Having a staff member in there is critical to maintain continuity and a line of communication from breakout group back to plenary, and of course, exercise staff. I have seen it a few ways. Certain programs have the capability to deploy users to breakouts with the click of a button, right? But that requires staff work ahead of time, right after they join, to identify which group they go into. So you have to plan for that. And you have to have a plan for the people that join late. How are you assigning them to different breakout rooms? The other way we've seen it done is, let's say your program doesn't have that capability, or it's a little shaky. We then use separate, potentially separate chats, but more often than not, you identify a breakout room, you say who's going to it, what its mission is, and then you give them a unique teleconference number and PIN, and that is their breakout room. They nominate someone or maybe two people. They do their thing in their breakout room. They have a clear understanding of what they're expected to, their outputs, right? You send a message out either through the program or through a text or through an email somehow that the rooms are breaking at X time, bring them back in the plenary, and then they do a brief out. So there's only two ways I've seen it done, and it's through the program fully or partially, or not through the program, done through a teleconference. But always maintain exercise control presence.
Great, thank you, Matt. We got a comment following up on what you mentioned in terms of, doing those comms checks and working through and kind of training on the platforms ahead of time. Do you have any additional recommendations or lessons learned on virtual comms checks a week prior or a day prior, kind of the timing and who all needs to be involved in those ahead of the exercise?
Yep, so ahead of the exercise, so the assumptions I'm going to answer on are the program has been chosen, the participants, the expected participants are largely chosen, and they understand that they're going to be a participant. And obviously some type of invitation process has occurred where they are aware of these testing sessions and the exercise team's requirement for them to attend. So let's assume all that's in place. The key is making them open and as user-friendly as possible. We make ours typically for an hour. I use the word open. They can come and go as they please. They're coming in, they're entering, they're making sure they can connect the audio and actually enter in the program, use the features that will be used during the exercise. They're free to ask questions during that testing session, and then they can leave. They could come at 2 p.m. at the start, or they could come at 2:30 in the middle. It doesn't matter as long as they show up to one of them. So it comes down to messaging that they're happening, they're expected to show up, and that you give them some basic instructions on how to connect, and then have your technical staff on standby to help out folks who run into some issues. Doing them a week before is great. It keeps it fresh in people's minds, and usually a week out, you know who's supposed to come to the exercise. So you're not grasping at straws there. Over.
Great, thanks, Matt. Our next question is, do you have a recommendation for the optimal duration for a virtual tabletop exercise?
Yeah, so this one's often debated, and you got to feel your audience and your sponsor, right? So most of what NED delivers typically is around the 4-hour mark, with breaks included in that. We've noticed a lot of our exercises end with people wanting more. Sometimes we don't get to all of the objectives or all of the content because the discussion was so robust. So it's a tough decision to be made prior to exercise conduct, because you never want to go overtime, right? People have lives, they have other work. You don't want to keep them past time. So 4 hours is where we start, and then we adjust from there. That typically hits the meeting fatigue level, and it allows enough breaks and a balance of interaction and breaks that seems to have worked for us.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. So that's our last question. I will turn it back to you, Karen, to close us out.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you also, Matt, for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you to our great audience for participating. Go on, give yourselves a hand. You know you want to. For more information on NEMA, please visit our website, www.nemaweb.org. Take care, stay well, and have a productive rest of your day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.